At 28, Formula One's four-time champion has reached a soul-destroying crossroads. He can serve a Red Bull contract through 2028, wrestle a package that has fallen from the front, and pretend P8 builds character. Or he can walk away while the sport searches for enough electrical energy to produce actual racing. The tragedy of Max Verstappen is simple. He achieved his childhood dream, conquered the grid, became a father, and discovered success cannot force passion to survive. After Japan, he questioned whether 22 race weekends were worth losing time with family and friends. That is not contract negotiation. It is an existential warning. So, has Formula One finally broken its most unbreakable driver? Subscribe, because Max's next decision could trigger a Red Bull meltdown nobody is prepared to contain. To understand why that warning carries so much weight, you have to strip away the trophies and look at the life underneath them. Verstappen did not arrive in Formula One as an ordinary teenager with a pleasant hobby. Racing was the family business, the family language, and sometimes the family pressure cooker. His father, Jos, had lived inside the paddock, driving for teams that included Benetton, alongside Michael Schumacher. His mother, Sophie Kumpen, had been a serious kart racer respected across Europe. Max, in other words, was not chasing a dream from the outside. He was born standing inside it. He was driving karts almost as soon as most children were learning to ride bicycles. That upbringing created a frightening competitor. It also meant childhood and competition became almost impossible to separate. Every mistake mattered. Every wet lap became a lesson. Every defeat followed him back into the van, where the debrief could last longer than the race itself. Jos demanded discipline because the goal was never merely to participate. The goal was to reach Formula One and survive among adults who had spent their lives preparing for the same opportunity. Stories from those karting years are almost uncomfortable to hear now. A young Max, left at a petrol station after a bad race. A father who refused to soften the standard because the sport he was preparing his son for would never soften either. Whether every story is exact or slightly polished by retelling, the picture is consistent. This was not a hobby that grew into a career. It was a career imposed on a childhood, and the boy delivered on every demand placed upon him. Max reached the grid in 2015 at just 17, before he was legally allowed to drive an ordinary road car alone in some countries. Formula One responded by changing its super license rules, effectively ensuring nobody could copy his route so easily. That tells you everything about the scale of the gamble. Toro Rosso was not developing a normal prospect. It was throwing a teenager into motorsport's most expensive examination and asking him to learn at 300 kilometers per hour, in cars worth millions, in front of a global audience waiting for him to fail. He learned frighteningly quickly. Red Bull promoted him in 2016, replacing Daniil Kvyat after only 4 races. Max then won on his debut for the senior outfit in Spain. At 18, he became the youngest Grand Prix winner in history. It looked like a fairy tale, except fairy tales usually include a relaxed childhood and fewer arguments over braking zones. What most people saw as a beginning was actually the collection of a debt years in the making. The 2021 title fight against Lewis Hamilton pushed that identity to its limit. Every weekend felt like a legal case conducted with front wings. Silverstone brought a huge crash. Monza ended with one vehicle resting on another. Saudi Arabia became a festival of penalties, accusations, and mutual suspicion. Abu Dhabi then delivered the most controversial championship finish of the modern era. Max won his first crown. But the achievement arrived wrapped in a dispute the sport still cannot discuss without starting a small civil war. The pressure of that year would have flattened most drivers. Verstappen absorbed it, then went looking for more. He did not celebrate quietly and retreat. He came back hungrier, as if the controversy had only sharpened the point he wanted to prove to everyone who doubted the manner of his first title. Then came domination. Verstappen won another championship in 2022, crushed the field in 2023 with one of the most dominant seasons in the sport's history, and secured a 4th consecutive title in 2024, even as Red Bull's advantage began disappearing. During the dominant period, he made winning look routine. That was the cruel illusion. Fans saw the anthem, the trophies, and the finger raised after another victory. They did not see a man collecting infinite happiness. They saw someone completing the mission drilled into him since childhood, checking boxes that had been drawn for him before he could spell his own surname. By 2025, the machinery around that mission was changing. Adrian Newey, The design genius behind the winning cars had departed. Key personnel followed him out of the door, and internal stability no longer looked untouchable. McLaren had developed into a genuine force, and Lando Norris ended Max's championship streak. Verstappen still won 8 races and dragged the fight to Abu Dhabi, missing a 5th title by only 2 points. That was not failure by any sensible standard. In Formula One, however, sensible standards are usually abandoned somewhere between the hospitality unit and the first angry television debate. Red Bull also spent heavily in human effort and development focus to keep that 2025 challenge alive. The bill arrived when the sport reset for 2026. New chassis rules, active aerodynamics, different power unit demands, and a far greater emphasis on electrical energy changed how drivers had to manage a lap. Formula One advertised innovation. Verstappen felt the basic act of racing had been diluted. That distinction matters. Max did not complain simply because he had stopped winning. He openly said he could accept running 7th or 8th. He had endured uncompetitive machinery earlier in his career, and he had never once hidden from a fight. What he rejected was the sensation that a driver's instincts were being replaced by energy targets and artificial management. When someone built to attack begins calling the formula anti-driving, the governing bodies should not dismiss it as a champion throwing his toys from the cockpit. This was the most instinctive driver of his era, warning that the sport was engineering the instinct out of itself. When the person best equipped to master a challenge tells you the challenge has become the wrong kind, that is not weakness talking. That is expertise, refusing to stay silent. The opening rounds gave his frustration a scoreboard. In Australia, the Red Bull snapped during qualifying, and Max crashed. He recovered to 6th in the race, but recovery drives were not supposed to become the new team strategy. China was worse. He called the sprint a disaster, started the Grand Prix 8th, slipped backward, and retired after 45 laps with a coolant problem. Red Bull had not merely fallen behind Mercedes. After 3 rounds, it sat 6th in the constructors' standings with 16 points, behind Haas and Alpine. That is not a dip. That is a champion waking up in the midfield with no map home. Japan therefore became emotionally decisive. Suzuka is a circuit that rewards commitment, rhythm, and trust, exactly the qualities that once defined him. Instead, Verstappen finished 8th and spoke with unusual openness afterward. Privately, he said, he was happy. Inside the cockpit, enjoyment had vanished. He questioned whether traveling through a 22-race season was worth missing his family and friends when the racing itself no longer delivered satisfaction. Notice what he did not say. He did not demand another 0 on his salary. He did not issue a theatrical threat to Mercedes or ask Red Bull to fire half the factory by breakfast. Money had stopped being the point. Max had already earned enough, won enough, and proved enough. Formula One's usual leverage could not frighten a driver who genuinely believed he could leave tomorrow and find happiness somewhere else. That is a kind of freedom the paddock rarely knows how to handle. That makes his position terrifying for Red Bull. Contracts only control people who still want what the contract provides. His deal may run through 2028, with reported performance clauses potentially creating earlier options, but paper cannot manufacture desire. If Max wakes up and decides the Nürburgring, Le Mans, GT racing, family life, and his own team offer more meaning, a corporate lawyer cannot strap passion back into the RB22. His new role as a father sharpens that calculation. Daughter Lily arrived in 2025, and suddenly every race weekend carried a visible alternative cost. Before fatherhood, another flight meant another chance to win. Now it can mean time away from a young family for a contest he no longer enjoys. That does not make Verstappen soft. It makes him painfully rational. The man who once measured his life in tenths of a second has found something that does not appear on any timing screen. A championship can be defended. A first birthday cannot be rescheduled. When the reward on offer stops outweighing what it costs to chase it, even the most driven competitor is allowed to do the arithmetic. Think about the irony. Formula One spent years selling Max as the cold machine, the ruthless Dutchman who cared only about victory. Now the supposed robot is expressing an extremely human limit, while the business around him wants another season, another content cycle, another global event, and another piece of his time. The sport loves authenticity, until an authentic answer threatens the television schedule. Yet the situation did not move in a straight line toward surrender. Red Bull gradually improved. Max reached the podium in Canada, although problems for rivals helped open that opportunity. Barcelona provided a harsher measurement. He finished fourth, but ended roughly 40 seconds behind race winner Lewis Hamilton. The position looked respectable. The stopwatch delivered the insult. Austria finally offered something more convincing. Major upgrades helped the vehicle, and Verstappen split the Mercedes drivers to finish second. Red Bull's best result of the year at that point. For one afternoon, the negative loop appeared to loosen. The engineers had found performance. Max could attack again. Hope returned to Milton Keynes, carrying a laptop and desperately asking everyone not to touch anything. Then Silverstone turned technical frustration into a safety scandal. While fighting for a podium late in the British Grand Prix, Verstappen lost control at the high-speed Stowe corner and ended in the gravel. The rear wing system had failed to behave correctly, causing a sudden loss of downforce. A related problem had already produced a frightening moment in Austria. Max called the situation super dangerous and said he was getting fed up. This was no longer about a tenth of a second or an uncomfortable balance. Downforce is what presses the vehicle into the track through a fast corner. When that aerodynamic support disappears unexpectedly, the driver does not receive a polite calendar invitation to correct the slide. The rear steps out, the barrier approaches, and physics starts reading the terms and conditions. At the speeds involved, there is no time to think, only time to react, and even the best reactions cannot rewrite the laws of grip. Red Bull investigated, identified the technical issue, and reverted to a conventional rear-wing solution. Verstappen escaped injury, but luck is not an engineering department. Asking a four-time champion to trust a package that has surprised him violently twice is a spectacular way to make retirement sound relaxing. A driver can tolerate being slow. He should never be asked to tolerate unpredictability at that speed. Slow costs points. Unpredictable costs careers, and occasionally more. Red Bull did recover. Verstappen took third in Belgium and second in Hungary, proving the upgrades had created genuine momentum. By the summer break, he had 4 podiums, but no victories from 11 Grand Prix, sat 6th in the championship with 109 points, and had recorded 3 retirements. Those numbers describe improvement, not restoration. A driver accustomed to controlling title fights was now celebrating evidence that the car might finally remain relevant. So what does Max actually want? Not guaranteed victory. No serious competitor can demand that. He wants a machine that responds naturally, regulations that reward attack, and a reason to believe the sacrifice still leads somewhere meaningful. Red Bull must therefore solve 2 problems at once. It has to close the performance gap, and it has to rebuild emotional trust before its most important employee decides the entire project has expired. One of those problems can be measured in the wind tunnel. The other cannot be measured at all. A team can throw resources at aerodynamics and eventually find lap time. There is no comparable department for restoring a driver's belief that the effort is worth it. Trust, once spent, does not come back on the next upgrade cycle. It comes back slowly, if it comes back at all, and only after the car has stopped frightening the man inside it. Verstappen already has somewhere to take that ambition. He has expanded Verstappen Racing, invested in sim racing and GT competition, and openly discussed endurance goals. Those categories offer traffic, changing conditions, shared vehicles, and the type of instinctive combat he believes Formula One is losing. Le Mans would not be retirement from racing. It would be retirement from Formula One's particular brand of bureaucracy. He has even raced under a pseudonym in the past, purely for the love of it, which tells you the passion was never the problem. The instinct to compete is still fully intact. The only question is where he chooses to point it, and Formula One no longer holds an automatic monopoly on his answer. That is the nightmare hiding behind every Red Bull reassurance. If Max joined another Formula One outfit, Red Bull could at least tell itself the sport remained the destination. If he leaves the championship altogether and immediately looks happier in a GT3 vehicle, the verdict becomes much uglier. It would suggest the problem was not age, courage, or competitive hunger. The problem was what Formula One asked racing to become. There is also a brutal championship consequence. Red Bull has spent years designing around Verstappen's extraordinary sensitivity and sharp front-end preference. Teammates have repeatedly struggled to match his output, some visibly broken by the comparison. Isaac Hadjar has shown promise, but replacing a 4-time champion is not a normal promotion. Remove Max, and Red Bull does not merely lose points, it loses the reference used to identify what the car can do beyond reasonable expectations. Sponsors would notice. Engineers considering rival offers would notice. Every available driver would ask whether the decline that exhausted Verstappen could swallow them too. The team that once represented the most aggressive destination on the grid could become a rebuilding project, powered by memories and an energy drink marketing budget. In a paddock that moves on quickly, reputation is momentum, and momentum is exactly what walking away from Verstappen would drain. On the other hand, staying carries risk for Max. If Red Bull recovers and the regulations improve, walking away could close the door on more titles, while he remains physically capable of winning them. Michael Schumacher reached 7 championships. Lewis Hamilton reached 7. Verstappen sits on 4. The record chase exists, and history would remember whoever finally matched or beat those numbers. But Max has repeatedly indicated statistics alone do not control him. You cannot tempt a man with history if he believes he has already achieved his end goal. That is what makes this story heartbreaking, rather than merely dramatic. Most drivers spend their entire lives begging Formula One to let them enter. Verstappen may leave while still among the fastest, because reaching the summit did not create a permanent reason to stay there. The child who sacrificed normality achieved exactly what he was trained to achieve. Now the adult is deciding whether the price should continue after the dream has already been fulfilled. Still, Formula One ignores its leading drivers at its peril. Regulations need efficiency and manufacturer relevance. But racing cannot feel like an inconvenient side effect of a science project. If the fastest competitors spend more time discussing modes than attacking corners, the technical achievement begins defeating the entertainment. Nobody buys a ticket to admire a responsible kilowatt calculation. The sport was built on the sight of the best drivers in the world dragging difficult cars to the edge of control, and no amount of efficiency can replace that spectacle if the drivers themselves stop believing in it. The next phase will reveal whether the recent podiums restored Max's belief or merely delayed the decision. Results matter, but watch his language. Does he describe the car as enjoyable? Does he talk about the future without immediately mentioning alternatives? Does Red Bull give him predictable behavior through fast corners? Those clues will tell us more than another carefully polished statement about everyone working hard at the factory. For now, Verstappen remains committed enough to push, criticize, and extract podiums from an imperfect package. That matters. Indifference would be the true final stage. Anger means he still cares. However, Red Bull cannot confuse remaining emotion with unlimited patience. Every technical failure spends another piece of trust, and the account is no longer bottomless. What would you do in his position? Stay through 2028 and gamble that Red Bull can rebuild a championship-winning machine? Or leave at 28 with 4 titles, 71 victories, a family waiting, and every other form of motorsport still available? There is no cowardly choice here. The only foolish choice would be continuing solely because strangers demand more trophies. Max Verstappen's tragedy is not that his career has lacked glory. It is that glory arrived so early and cost so much that Formula One now struggles to offer him anything he values more. Red Bull can fix floors, wings, cooling systems, and correlation errors. It cannot order him to love the result. No budget, however large, buys back the feeling that made a boy fall for racing in the first place. That feeling either returns on its own or it does not, and everyone inside the team knows it. The clock is therefore ticking towards something larger than a driver market announcement. If the improvement continues, Max may rediscover enough joy to stay and fight. If another engineering disaster returns him to the wall or the midfield, the most ruthless driver of his generation could make his most ruthless decision yet, choosing himself over Formula One. Do you believe Verstappen will remain with Red Bull, move to a rival, or walk away from the championship completely? Pick your side in the comments. And subscribe now, because if Max drops the final ultimatum, the shockwave will not stop at Milton Keynes. It will tear through the grid, reshape the driver market, and force every rival to rethink a future they assumed settled. When a champion of this stature moves, nobody is left where they were.